Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us here at this Business Day. I've been saying to governments that we want to have more engagement with them, and we like that they would involve us in a more constructive way than what they are doing. But the attitude from governments is improving, and they want more involvement from business.
A very warm welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us. Why should solutions to climate be driven by business? There are folk, and you saw them outside the hotel as you came in this morning, wearing masks and placards that saying asking business to drive all of this is rather like giving the keys to the booze cupboard to an alcoholic, asking the same alcoholic to run the brewery. They say business, the people in this room, are responsible for the mess we find ourselves in. But there's another point of view, and let's not be flippant about that. Some of the companies represented in this room today, their ability to achieve strategic objectives are enormous. So if not business, then who else? So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's put the first question. Solutions to climate need to be driven by business. Yes or no?
I believe very much that the dynamic is changing. In the past, you had civil society demanding, policymakers setting the regulatory framework, business then acting within that. We need to turn this around. Civil society demanding, us business leaders seeing the opportunity, consumer product companies setting targets for decarbonizing supply chain. So there's no alternative to strong leadership from the private sector. I think boardrooms often are more strategic on these issues today than cabinet rooms of governments.
The business, as we say, will do its job, and we are developing technology for mitigation. But if we don't get a clear signal that we have rules to work with, then unfortunately, as somebody said, business will make their decision anyway, but without rules. And I am not sure this is in the long-term interest of the planet.
So I think as business, we would want to see that, particularly if you look at market mechanisms like the clean development mechanisms. We use that to fund projects. We use that to really look at how do we make sure that the projects that we have to drive mitigation actions are funded.
I think even if there is, at the end of the week, some agreement, and maybe China and Brazil, for a variety of reasons, might move, and I like the European Durban roadmap as a vehicle, we will have something that is enacted and reduce carbon only by 2020. It's a new dynamic emerging, and I hope Rio will be an opportunity to play that new dynamic.
This is a make or break decade. The good news is that 90 countries have already made voluntary statements of intent. Already 100 countries have targets for renewable energy. China is implementing a cap and trade system on itself. Last year, $250 billion spent on renewable energy, of which more than half was in the developing world. The problem is not that nothing is happening. There's a lot happening. The problem is it needs to at least triple.
So I think the future lies in business sectors getting together from a bottom-up approach and start putting their plans together. That the future lies in the next decade around businesses taking the leadership.
But let's confess, we are not one unified business community. So I think there has to be some strategy also on how we start. I would start with the consumer product industries, closer to the consumer behavior that is changing, and then roll it out from there. Go to mobility next. Go to small cities and business, energy efficiency, and tackle the big, tough ones like energy utilities and cement and steel.
The other interesting experiment that is going on in the world at the moment is, I'm sure you're all very aware, those of you from Europe, the country called Belgium, which has been politician-less for, nearly 600 days, and they seem to be managing quite well.
According to the International Energy Agency forecasts, energy efficiency will contribute to carbon reduction more than the renewable energy. Water efficiency, energy efficiency, material efficiency in products and in processes have created competitive edge and therefore opportunities for us.
Lifestyle changes and more strategic low-carbon planning will only happen through carbon pricing. Or are there other drivers?
Yes, carbon pricing is essential, but it's not everything. The reason my 9-year-old son switches the light off is not to save me money. It's because he feels that it's the right thing to do. Why? Because he's learned about climate change. We've learned a lot in the economic profession that whilst prices are essential, they need to be complemented by other measures. But from the history of environmentalism, governments have rarely led. They have responded to what the citizens want.
When we ask the users, customers, the drivers of the decision making, they say first the price of the product, then the energy efficiency.
Well, nothing drives, of course, behavior and many other things better than prices. So carbon prices are critical. We need to price externalities. Beyond prices, it is many targeted incentives like feed and tariff regimes, taxes here, reduction subsidies there, that give you right incentives for deploying and commercializing new technologies. So I see it really as a triangle between consumer behavior, consumer awareness, which has been vastly improved. Let us, the business community, come up with a vision and the measures that, in a sense, turns crisis into transformation.
The context is that we have resources that are depleted, so it's not just an issue of carbon. It's an issue of water and everything else around how we use resources globally. And one of the key recommendations and responses must be some sense of how do you put carbon pricing in and price your externalities.
Are you suggesting that we need then to impose an accurate carbon cost on business, including the social costs, the health costs, the education costs?
To emit CO2 should have a price. Whatever it is, I don't know. If it's global, and I agree that unfortunately it's perhaps irrealistic, so it will be regional, it will be sectorial, but it must have a price. Without price, no decision is taken on the investment side.
If the South African government imposes a carbon tax on their coal exports, it'll kill the business.
I'm just saying that we have to be realistic and that business needs rules.
We are going to go to question number 3 on our agenda. It is said there is no such thing as a climate project, only commercially viable projects. If that is true, how can international climate finance promote the transition to more climate-friendly investment without distorting the market?
The way to look at this whole thing of private versus public is, let's say the total investment in the world today is, let's say, $15 trillion. About a third of that is public, 2/3 is private. The name of the game is to green all of that. Green it for resilience and green it for low carbon. And that means our agriculture needs to be different, our energy needs to be different, our urban planning, our house building, our factories, they all need to be different. There will never be enough public money in order to get the job done. So we have to leverage it. And of course we need to use that money to affect the 10 trillion of private investment. It'd be nuts to say we only want to green the public investments. Whether it's a large-scale producer of renewable energy, they need to be subsidized at the moment or they won't do it. Or they need to be given a regulatory environment. If they're given a regulatory environment, you're still essentially creating, through feed-in tariffs, the kind of subsidies they need. So of course you need a private sector.
If we move with incentive schemes for renewables or whatever, we distort markets. I think that's simply not right, because if you accept that, as we mentioned before, that externalities are not properly priced, and that we have as Nick Stern again puts it, the greatest market failure here, and in the absence then of a global carbon price or tax or whatever that produces that price or cap and trade, you have to correct in other ways. Secondly, if you accept that fossil fuel subsidies of an enormous magnitude and are projected to go to more than 600 billion annually, business as usual by 2020, an enormous distortion in the markets, then there's all, I could go on, there are all justification then to say for renewable energy to have feed and tariff regimes which on a declining but certain basis subsidize the deployment of new technologies. And again, many other examples how these incentives work has been done in the past. It's not distorting, it's incentivizing in the right way. So it is really the sharing of risks that I think is the main bottleneck now for scalability of the many good examples we already have.
One of the key realities, somebody must pay for this. And that's why these global facilities are very important to help developing countries to make that shift.
What's the one thing that you would like this audience to take away when they get on their planes and head back to wherever it is they come back from?
In a world where politics are very stretched and focused for many good reasons on the short term, where we have a very difficult decade ahead of suboptimal volatile growth, where we lose the key years to do something about what is a real long-term crisis, carbon and climate, that there's no alternative but to form very new bottom-up ways of giving the urgency, the answers, and then induce political systems with consumer awareness, with coalitions of like-minded business, with civil society to respond differently. I think we do politicians a big favor if we provide more leadership here.
There is success at reasonable scale all over the world. The more we can demonstrate that, the more that we can show that success at scale, at reasonable cost, that creates jobs is possible, the more we're going to nudge governments at every level, local level, city level, national level, global, that we will nudge them in the right direction.
We need out of Durban a continuation for the Kyoto Protocol. We need out of Durban a technology transfer mechanism. We need out of Durban an adaptation mechanism. We need the Green Climate Fund established. We need to make sure it's funded. And if the World Bank is going to look after it as an interim, we need to move very quickly into a board that will administer those funds. But the time has come for business to take the action and change pace in terms of making a real difference.
Andrew, Levent, Kayo, Brian, Philippe, thank you on behalf of our audience today. Thank you. Thank you.
We got some really stark reminders of why the business community should actually care, because 85% of the mitigation investments are going to be made by the private sector. And secondly, a very significant portion of the cost of inaction will also be borne by the private sector. So that, I think, was a very good reminder of the why. Unlike politicians, whether the elections are next week or next month or next year, politicians cannot at the national level give you that predictability. We need to say what we are going to do, as opposed to waiting for others to indicate what they are going to do, especially on the part of the political community. In other words, business needs to step forward with very real solutions, very real ideas, both in terms of projects and activities, but perhaps in the policy sphere as well.
We need to consider taking ownership of the future, irrespective of the outcomes of COP17. The fact is that there's things to be done, and we shouldn't necessarily let political processes hold those up. Here is an opportunity for us really to set society as a whole on a path, because business is a reflection of society as well.